Welcome to I Can't Find the Answer Online. Where do I go next? The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong solely to the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views of Family Search International and RootsTech. Thank you for spending a few moments learning about I Can't Find the Answer Online. Where do I go next? My name is Joshua Taylor, and like you, I do a lot of family history research, and a lot of that research happens online. But sometimes when I'm looking online, I get stuck, and I'm not exactly sure where to go next. So what do I do? Well, we're going to look at how to make sure you're asking the right question. We're going to look at some of the other sites you can branch out to, other places you can research, and then focus a little bit on some of those on-site places you might want to make sure you explore as you try and find some of those answers. Because while you can find a lot online, you can't find everything. So first, make sure that you're asking the right type of question. Really look at the answers that you desire and determine if those can actually be answered. Is the question you're asking something that you're going to be able to find the answer to in a single document? Or are you going to need several documents that might work together to help give you the information that you need? Are you asking the right question? What sources and methods might help you answer the question, even if they haven't necessarily worked in the past? Why is that answer so important to your research? What alternative questions could you ask yourself, or alternative answers might exist? What about those that might help you to find exactly what you're looking for by just changing the question a little bit? So with that in mind, be sure that we remember that the answers we're seeking are simply part of a much larger process. We are fortunate when a single online document or online search leaves us to exactly what we want to find. When that process is complete, we're very fortunate. But guess what? That doesn't happen all the time. Family history is a process, and our online research is just one component of that. Family history includes efficient research, it includes time for analysis and writing and compilation, and it requires us to remain focused on what we're looking for, avoiding the open piles, i.e. the tabs that might occur on your computer, and measuring progress and knowing when it's time to invest more time in finding a specific answer, or it might be time to change course and look for something else. When we're searching online, we're looking at a vast quantity and different types of materials. We are very fortunate to have resources both in the commercial world and the nonprofit world that index records for us by name, by first name, by last name, that identify the name of a father or a mother or a spouse or a date of birth. But in all honesty, there are millions and millions of records that are online that haven't been indexed at that level. There are pages that have been digitized, that have been scanned and made available, that requires us to locate those pages and then browse and read and actually do some research. There's materials that exist in social media outlets and blogs and other types of online homes that can provide us with pertinent information, but it's not something you're going to find in your usual resources that you might turn to consistently for family history. So most of us are very aware of resources like Family Search and Ancestry and Find My Past and My Heritage. And they are terrific places, and I find new things in them almost every single day as a genealogist. But sometimes the answers that I'm looking for simply cannot be found in the documents that only exist within those particular very common resources. And part of this is because of the way that research drives us in a lot of cases. We are driven to look for something when a new collection might appear online, or when we might have new information about a particular family member or a particular tricky question that we're trying to answer. Instead, to answer the question of what to do next, take time to branch out to other websites, specifically looking at sites that might have materials and collections that are not available on sites like Ancestry or Family Search or Find My Past or My Heritage, but rather sites that are unique to a specific repository or a specific region. One common and very, very useful type of online resource to turn to is a regional collection that might include original materials from a number of smaller repositories gathered together and available and searchable for you to access. These might be projects that are examples of cooperation and association between public libraries, university libraries, government archives, and other repositories. Two great examples of these types of collections are the New York Heritage Digital Collections and the South Carolina Digital Library. So let's look at both of those examples, keeping in mind what resources might exist that are similar to this for a region that you're researching in. Now, the New York Heritage Digital Collections includes resources from a variety of repositories across the state of New York, but it's very, very important to use because it helps me identify collections that I might never knew actually existed. I spend time consistently looking at the A to Z or A to Z list of all the different collections. And I discovered that there is an online collection that discusses 18th and 19th century cooking in the Hudson Valley. Now, that might not have answered my most immediate research question, but it's another resource I can use that I didn't realize existed before I began to explore this regional collection. Other resources that I found there include some of the original maps and archives from the Holland Land Company, digitized but not indexed by name, so it's going to require that page-by-page search, but at least I know where they are and I know how I can begin to access and use those materials. And that's what's really critical. We want to be able to make sure that our what's next turns to where we can access further records to continue our research. Moving from New York to the South Carolina Digital Library, we see another great resource, but set up slightly differently. We don't see the first or last name search, but we can actually browse materials that are available through this collection through a map. So we can look and select a specific county, and then we're presented with the list of digital collections that pertain to that specific county. This is great when we're trying to branch out of some of those usual websites that we look at all the time. So in this particular digital library, when I looked for information about Chesterfield County, I was led to the Spencer family papers that have been digitized and placed online by the Chesterfield County Library. Again, I might not have started my search at the Chesterfield County Library, and when I was looking for the Robeson family, I certainly wouldn't have looked at the Spencer family papers, except that when I start to browse through the papers, I discover that within the Spencer family papers are materials and documents for other family members, including the inheritance of William L. Robeson from William Lord. Now, here is an answer to a question that for many might seem buried in this online collection. How did I find it? I turned to a regional collection and I browsed, and I was very patient as I began to conduct research and analyze what I was finding and moving collection by collection by collection. In addition to using some of these regional materials, public libraries are also a necessary point for your research. And I'm not just talking about the public library in your own backyard. I'm talking about the public library that is in the location where your ancestors lived. Now, it might not have been built for many, many years until after your family had lived there, but it still can have materials about local history, and their online catalog or online collections can be an important part of research. Many materials and what you find online at public libraries, it's dependent upon funding and expertise and the collections they have. But let's take a look at two examples, the Boulder Public Library in Colorado and New York Public Library in New York City. The Boulder Public Library is a terrific example of an institution that has spent a lot of time and investment in digitizing collections and making them very, very accessible. There's no first or last name search here, but what there is the ability to actually put in a search term. So I'm going to put in an ancestor's name. And I was amazed to find a number of pictures and different catalog entries, all of which included materials that were pertinent to my particular research question. At this point, I had pretty much exhausted what I had found on some of the main family history websites, but I was finding new details, new tax records, new newspaper accounts, voting records, things that only exist at a local level that luckily the Boulder Public Library has preserved. Again, when I couldn't find the answers in one place, I had to turn and think locally. And in this case, this online collection actually presented several on-site collections that I now have to go visit or work with a librarian to research in that are actually sitting in Boulder. but that's all part of the process because not everything is online. The New York Public Library is one example of a massive library. Their digital collections include nearly 1 million individual items that have all been digitized and placed online and are available for us to access. The key is that these materials are not going to be indexed by name. The materials are going to be accessible almost as you would look for them in a library catalog. So I'm looking for keywords like ledger and city directories or newspapers, something that I would, again, look for in a catalog rather than a direct ancestor's name. And once I broaden that search, I can find amazing full-color ledgers and city directories and all sorts of documents that can be used in my research. These aren't the materials that are going to show up immediately in a search on Google. These aren't materials that are going to show up in a site like MyHeritage or a site like Family Search, but they're incredibly useful because that might be one of the only places that information was recorded. Now, we spent time looking at other online places to go, but you've also heard me talk about how we know that all materials are not online. So what do we do? We need to pivot and look for some of those on-site materials, those archival collections that are unique records that might be unique to a particular location or a particular repository. This can be some of the hardest research that we do, but can also be some of the most rewarding. Luckily, there is at least one resource that is great to find some of those on-site collections and is a great place to look at next when you've exhausted a lot of other resources, and that is ArchiveGrid. ArchiveGrid is created by OCLC, and it's a free resource that essentially provides a catalog of online archival collections that are available. Now, when I say online collections, I don't mean fully digitized. I mean an online catalog, so you can at least learn where that specific collection might be located. ArchiveGrid is completely free, and when you visit the website, one of the things that you can do is you can search either by a zip code or select by state or by country to find an archive that is near you. And of course, I use this to find archives that are near the places where my relatives lived and where I'm doing my research. And I'm always amazed at the variety and the different types of resources that might appear. Now, you can also search an ArchiveGrid by keyword, but keep in mind that the keyword that you use here is not always going to be the name of an ancestor. It's very unlikely that an archivist has created a collection or has curated materials that is the answer to the question you're looking for, and that's the title of the collection. Instead, you're going to find that these are going to be categorized by general subjects. So if I'm looking for someone who is a farmer in Taunton, Massachusetts, for example, I might do a search in ArchiveGrid with the keyword farm, the keyword account, and the keyword Taunton, looking for farm accounts in Taunton, knowing very well that it's unlikely these records would be fully indexed and probably are not even completely digitized. And in this case, I find a handful of records that are useful to me. I find a day book, an account book, all sorts of materials that are available at different repositories. When I click on a specific collection, I'm taken in this case to the ability to connect to a finding aid. And I learn that this particular collection, though it includes materials about Taunton, Massachusetts, is actually located at the New York Public Library because that's where the record ended up. A great example and a lesson to us that sometimes the materials that we're looking for are not always going to end up in the same geography or the same region where our ancestors lived. Looking back and exploring some of the other materials there's an account book by Josiah Newcomb that's available. This happens to be something where I learned the exact repository, I find out where it is, and I would have to contact that repository, of course, to do research in that particular collection. So ArchiveGrid is a great stepping stone to finding some of these original materials when you're looking for information. And because it's freely searchable online, it's a great stop when you're just trying to determine what other records might exist for your research. Another very helpful component to using ArchiveGrid when you're trying to figure out where to go next is the summary view of a search. So the summary view is not going to give you that listing of everything. Instead, that summary view is going to give you the results but broken down into specific categories. So people, groups, places, individual archives, the locations of archives, and then topics that might be found within those collections. And you can work to further narrow your search from there. This works particularly well for very common terms and common names that you might be looking for, because you never know how something might be cataloged or indexed or available to you as a researcher. So in this case, I've narrowed down resources that have to do with farm, account, and Taunton that are located in the town of Cambridge, Massachusetts. But let your mind wander a bit at the types of materials that you can find on a resource like ArchiveGrid. Where do I go next if I'm tracing a convict who might have been transported from England to Maryland in the colonial period? Well, I'm going to go to ArchiveGrid and type in the topic, Maryland convict immigration. And I am led to a collection called the Maryland Manuscripts Collection, which has a number of diaries and materials about elections and transportation and broadsides and directories and all sorts of things that I wouldn't necessarily have known actually existed because they're at a particular repository, not digitized, but part of an overall collection. Again, these are just samples of the types of things that you can find when you begin to think outside of those typical standard repositories that we use online for our research. Some topics can be as broad as needed. If I'm looking for information about tracing a colonial ancestor in Barbados, for example, I'm led to records from a plantation from the Bordett Hall estate. For some reason, though these records are about an estate in Barbados, they found their way up to Princeton University. Another great example of how records travel and move from place to place, and how we have to be diligent in our research as we find these different collections to do our actual analysis and our work. So I come back to the beginning when we look at the actual questions that we were asking. You've seen a variety of examples, some of those regional repositories, those online consortiums that have a number of great collections that we might not yet be exploring. The power of using those public libraries and some of the resources available, both on-site and that digital format. And then finally, exploring a resource like ArchiveGrid to really branch out of some of those other repositories. How do you know where to go on site? I use ArchiveGrid and I look for the place I'm researching or the topic, and it guides me to a couple of key repositories that I keep an eye on in my research. But always remember, when you're looking for a specific answer, can your answer actually be found? Are you asking a question that there might not be a concrete answer to? Are you asking the right question? Use these resources to come up with different sources and methods as you try and broaden your approach. And make sure that you understand why finding that answer is so important to your research. Sometimes there are other questions you can ask that will get you to exactly the same space. Thanks for spending a few moments learning about I can't find the answer online. Where do I go next? I trust this has been helpful, and I look forward to learning more about where you went next in your own family history search.